When my son Marcus told me that his wife's 28th birthday party was more important than my 60th, I smiled and said, what he didn't know was that I held the keys to both their future and their financial ruin, and sometimes the most powerful response isn't an argument, it's silence followed by action. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Rosemary Collins, though everyone calls me Rose, and for 32 years I poured my heart into raising my son Marcus in the suburbs of Denver, Colorado. After my husband James died in a construction accident when Marcus was only 14, I worked 3 jobs to keep our modest 2-story house on Maple Street and ensure my boy had every opportunity I never did. I cleaned offices at night, worked retail during the day, and spent weekends catering small events, all so Marcus could attend the private academy across town and later graduate from Colorado State University with a business degree. Those weren't easy years, but they were purposeful ones. I remember sitting at our kitchen table at midnight, balancing checkbooks by lamplight while Marcus slept upstairs, dreaming of the restaurant he wanted to open someday. Even as a teenager, he'd sketch floor plans on napkins and describe his vision of a farm-to-table bistro that would serve elevated comfort food to families like ours. His eyes would light up when he talked about it, and I'd listen for hours, encouraging every wild idea and ambitious plan. When Marcus met Vanessa during his junior year at college, I was genuinely happy for him. She was studying marketing at the University of Denver, came from what appeared to be a well-established family in Cherry Creek, and seemed to share his entrepreneurial spirit. The first time he brought her home for dinner, she complimented my pot roast and asked thoughtful questions about the catering business I'd started from our kitchen. She seemed interested in our family stories, laughed at my corny jokes, and even helped me wash dishes afterward despite my protest. Marcus graduated summa cum laude in 2019, and I felt such pride watching him walk across that stage. All those years of sacrifice, all those sleepless nights and aching feet from standing at retail counters, had led to this moment. He was the first person in our family to earn a college degree, and as I sat in the auditorium wiping away tears, I felt James's presence beside me, knowing he would have been just as proud. After graduation, Marcus and Vanessa moved into a sleek, downtown loft that I helped them secure with a co-signature on the lease. My credit score, built carefully over decades of never missing a payment, despite financial strain, opened doors that their fresh-out-of-college status couldn't. I didn't mind. I wanted to see my son succeed, and Vanessa seemed like a supportive partner who understood his dreams. The restaurant plan began to take shape seriously in early. Marcus had been working as a sous chef at a popular restaurant in Lohi, learning the business from the ground up, while Vanessa handled social media marketing for several local businesses. They spent months researching locations, developing their concept, and creating detailed business proposals. The space they finally found was perfect, a former coffee shop in the trendy Reno district, with exposed brick walls, large windows, and enough square footage for 48 seats, plus a full kitchen. When they approached me about investing in their dream, I didn't hesitate. Marcus presented me with a comprehensive business plan, complete with projected revenues, detailed startup costs, and a timeline for profitability. The total initial investment needed was $250,000. Marcus had saved $30,000 from his chef job, Vanessa contributed $20,000 from her marketing work, and they'd secured a small business loan for $100,000. They needed me to bridge the remaining $100,000 gap. I liquidated most of my retirement savings, took out a second mortgage on the house on Maple Street, and withdrew the life insurance money I'd been carefully preserving since James's death. It represented everything I had built over 26 years of widowhood, every sacrifice I'd made, every dream I'd deferred for my son's future. But seeing the hope in Marcus's eyes, remembering all those teenage conversations about his restaurant dreams, I signed the papers without a second thought. The restaurant, which they named Sage and Stone, opened in September 2021 after a year of renovations, permit delays, and the challenges of launching a business during a pandemic. I was there for every step of the process, helping them paint walls, assemble furniture, and organize the kitchen. I even contributed some of my catering recipes, including my famous herb-crusted salmon, that became one of their signature dishes. Opening night was magical. I wore my best dress, the navy blue one with small pearl buttons that I'd bought for Marcus's college graduation, and watched with immense pride as customers filled every table. For the first 6 months, everything seemed to be going well. Sage and Stone received positive reviews in local food magazines, developed a steady customer base, and even got featured in a Best New Restaurants article in Denver magazine. Marcus was in his element, creating innovative menus that changed seasonally and building relationships with local farmers and suppliers. Vanessa handled the marketing brilliantly, growing their social media following, and organizing successful events that brought new customers through the door. I felt so proud watching them work together as a team. Marcus would come by the house on Sunday afternoons, still wearing his chef's jacket, exhausted but energized as he described the week's successes and challenges. He'd tell me about the regular customers who requested specific dishes, the positive feedback they received, and his plans for expanding the menu. During those conversations, I felt that all my sacrifices had been worthwhile. This was what I'd worked for, seeing my son build something meaningful with his own hands and vision. Vanessa seemed genuinely appreciative of my investment and support during those early months. She'd send me photos of packed dining rooms, share positive customer reviews, and always made sure I had a reserved table when I wanted to dine there. For my 59th birthday in March 2022, they threw me a small celebration at the restaurant after closing time, complete with a custom cake made by Marcus and a heartfelt speech from Vanessa about how grateful they were for my belief in their dream. But somewhere around the 1-year mark, I began to notice subtle changes in their dynamic and their treatment of me. The Sunday visits became less frequent, with Marcus explaining that he was too busy with inventory and menu plan. When I called the restaurant to make reservations, I was sometimes told they were fully booked even though I could see empty tables when I drove by later that evening. Vanessa's social media posts about the restaurant's journey began to focus exclusively on her and Marcus's hard work and vision, with no mention of the family support that had made it possible. The first real warning sign came during a family dinner I hosted in late. I'd invited Marcus and Vanessa over for Sunday pot roast, something we'd done regularly since the restaurant opened. During the meal I mentioned that I'd been thinking about taking a small vacation to visit my sister in Portland, something I hadn't done in years because of financial constraints. Vanessa looked up from her plate and said, with a light laugh, "Oh, Rose, you should definitely travel while you can. I mean, you're not getting any younger, and who knows how much longer you'll be able to enjoy trips like that." The comment stung more than she probably intended, but it was the casualness of it that bothered me most. There was an underlying assumption that my prime years were behind me, that I should be grateful for whatever time I had left rather than planning for an active future. Marcus didn't respond to her comment, just continued eating as if nothing had been said. I smiled and changed the subject, but that night I lay awake thinking about the subtle shift in how they seemed to perceive me. Other small incidents began to accumulate. When I stopped by the restaurant unannounced one afternoon to drop off some fresh herbs from my garden, I found Vanessa in the office area, looking flustered as she sorted through a stack of papers. She quickly shuffled them together when she saw me, forcing a bright smile as she said they were just boring business stuff, and suggested I should call ahead next time to make sure they weren't too busy to chat. The papers I'd glimpsed looked like bills or invoices, but her reaction was so defensive that I didn't press for details. Marcus began canceling our regular dinners more frequently, citing restaurant responsibilities or claiming exhaustion. When we did spend time together, he seemed distracted and less interested in hearing about my life or my small catering job. Our conversations increasingly focused on the restaurant's needs, equipment that needed repair, staff scheduling challenges, or supply chain issues that were affecting their costs. I found myself offering advice and assistance that was politely acknowledged but never really welcomed or implemented. The most telling change was in their attitude toward my financial contribution to their business. In the early months, they'd provided regular updates about revenues and expenses, showing me quarterly reports and explaining how my investment was being used. By late 2022, those conversations became vague and infrequent. When I asked direct questions about the restaurant's financial performance, Marcus would give general answers about doing well or staying competitive without providing specific detail. I began to feel like I was transitioning from valued family member and business partner to well-meaning but unnecessary observer. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The energy and appreciation that had characterized our relationship during the restaurant's launch phase was gradually being replaced by polite distance and subtle condescension. They still invited me to major events and holidays, but I was increasingly treated as an honored guest rather than someone who had made their dream possible. The breaking point that would change everything was still several months away, but the foundation for it was being laid during this period. I was slowly being repositioned from essential family member to aging relative, who needed to be managed carefully and kept at an appropriate distance. Marcus and Vanessa were building their adult life together, and I was gradually being written out of the central narrative, relegated to the margins of their story despite being the one who had made the story possible in the first place. What they didn't realize was that I was paying attention to these changes, noting the subtle shifts in respect and inclusion. I wasn't just the devoted mother who had sacrificed everything for her son's happiness. I was also a woman who had navigated 26 years of widowhood, built a successful catering business from nothing, and learned to protect herself in a world that could be harsh to women alone. The same strength and strategic thinking that had gotten me through James's death and Marcus's childhood were still very much alive within me. As 2023 began, I found myself in an increasingly uncomfortable position. I loved my son deeply and wanted his marriage and business to succeed, but I was struggling with feeling taken for granted and marginalized in the life I had helped create. I began to pay closer attention to details I had previously overlooked, asking more pointed questions about the restaurant's finances, and observing the dynamics between Marcus and Vanessa more carefully. I also started to rebuild my own life in small ways, focusing more attention on my catering business, and reconnecting with friends I had neglected during the intense period of supporting the restaurant launch. I joined a book club at the local library, started taking yoga classes at the community center, and began to rediscover interests and relationships that existed independently of my role as Marcus's supportive mother. This personal renewal gave me perspective on how much of myself I had surrendered in service of my son's dream. While I didn't regret the financial investment or the emotional support I had provided, I was beginning to understand that healthy relationships require mutual respect and recognition, even between parents and adult children. The unconditional love I felt for Marcus didn't mean I had to accept being treated as a peripheral figure in his life. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would test the foundation of our relationship and force all of us to confront the true dynamics of love, risk, and family obligation. Neither Marcus nor Vanessa realized that the quiet, supportive mother they had grown accustomed to managing was actually a woman who had built her entire life on the principle of surviving whatever challenges arose, and who still possessed the strength and wisdom to protect her own interests when necessary. As winter turned to spring in 2023, I found myself approaching my 60th birthday with a mixture of anticipation and uncertainty. This milestone felt significant not just because of the round number, but because it represented 6 decades of life experience, including the past 4 years of supporting Marcus and Vanessa's dream. I had been looking forward to celebrating this birthday as a reflection of everything I had accomplished and overcome, and I hoped it would be an opportunity for my son to acknowledge the sacrifices I had made for his success. What I didn't anticipate was that this birthday would become the catalyst for a confrontation that would fundamentally alter our family dynamic and teach all of us lessons about respect, gratitude, and the true cost of taking someone for granted. The woman who had quietly supported everyone else's dreams for so long was about to discover what happened when those same people forgot to value the dreamer who had made their success possible. The erosion began so gradually that I almost convinced myself I was imagining. In early 2023, Marcus started calling less frequently, and when he did call, our conversations felt rushed and perfunctory. Where he once would spend 20 minutes telling me about new recipes he was developing or interesting customers he'd met, now he'd give brief updates about the restaurant being busy or doing fine before finding reasons to end the call quickly. Vanessa's behavior became even more telling. During my occasional visits to Sage and Stone, she'd greet me with the same bright smile she gave to any customer, but there was a professional distance that hadn't existed before. She'd ask polite questions about my health and my catering work, but her attention would drift toward other tasks or conversations within minutes. I began to feel like I was interrupting their busy lives, rather than visiting family members who valued my presence. The financial updates that had once been regular and detailed became sporadic and vague. When I asked Marcus how the restaurant was performing financially, he'd give general answers about staying afloat in a challenging market without providing the specific numbers and insights he'd shared eagerly during the first year. When I pressed for more details, suggesting that as an investor I should understand how my money was being used, he'd reassure me that everything was under control and that I shouldn't worry about the business side. This shift from transparency to secrecy troubled me more than the financial performance itself. I had run my own catering business for decades and understood that restaurants faced ongoing challenges, especially in their early years. What bothered me was being treated like a worried relative who needed to be managed rather than a business partner who deserved honest communication about the venture I had made possible. The pattern became clearer during family gatherings throughout the spring and summer of Marcus and Vanessa would arrive at my house for dinner or holiday celebrations, but they seemed distracted and eager to leave. Their conversations focused increasingly on their social circle, restaurant industry events they were attending, and trips they were planning. When I tried to contribute to these discussions, or share news about my own life, I noticed their attention would wander or they'd redirect the conversation back to their experiences. One particularly telling incident occurred during a barbecue I hosted for the 4th of July. I had invited Marcus, Vanessa, and several neighbors for an afternoon gathering in my backyard. I spent the morning preparing Marcus's favorite dishes, including the potato salad recipe his father had loved and homemade apple pie with a lattice crust that took hours to perfect. When Marcus and Vanessa arrived, they brought store-bought dessert and seemed surprised that I had gone to such elaborate preparations. During the gathering, Vanessa spent most of her time on her phone, posting Instagram stories from my backyard, and responding to messages about restaurant business. When neighbors asked about Sage and Stone, she launched into detailed descriptions of their recent successes, upcoming media features, and plans for expansion. She spoke with passion and expertise about their vision, their commitment to locally sourced ingredients, and their role in Denver's evolving food scene. What struck me wasn't her enthusiasm for the restaurant, which I genuinely appreciated, but how she told the story. In her narrative, Sage and Stone was the result of her and Marcus's hard work, creativity, and business acumen. She mentioned the challenges they'd overcome, the risks they'd taken, and the satisfaction of building something meaningful together. There was no acknowledgement of the financial foundation that had made their risk-taking possible, no mention of the family support that had allowed them to pursue their dream, without the crushing debt that burdened most young restaurateurs. Later that evening, after the guests had left and I was cleaning up, Marcus helped me carry dishes into the kitchen. I decided to address what I'd observed, asking gently if he felt comfortable with how Vanessa discussed the restaurant's origin. I explained that while I didn't need constant recognition, it felt strange to hear their success story told as if they had bootstrapped everything independently. Marcus's response surprised me with its defensiveness. He said that Vanessa was simply focusing on the operational aspects of the business, rather than dwelling on financial details that weren't relevant to casual conversation. He suggested that I was being sensitive about recognition, and reminded me that they had always been grateful for my support. When I pressed him about whether he thought it was accurate to present their story without acknowledging the family investment that had made it possible, he became irritated and said that I was making everything about money. That phrase stayed with me for weeks after. I wasn't making everything about money. I was trying to understand why my contribution to their success was being erased from their narrative. The money represented years of sacrifice, careful saving, and strategic risk-taking on my part. It wasn't just a financial transaction, it was a tangible expression of love, faith, and commitment to my son's dreams. When that contribution was omitted from their story, it felt like my role in their success was being deliberately minimized. As summer progressed into fall, I began to notice other changes in how Marcus and Vanessa related to me. They stopped asking for my advice about restaurant operations, even though I had decades of experience in food service and had built my own successful catering business from nothing. When I offered suggestions about menu items, customer service approaches, or marketing strategies, They'd listen politely but dismiss my ideas as outdated or inappropriate for their target demographic. The generational divide became a recurring theme in our interactions. Vanessa would make comments about how restaurant marketing had evolved beyond traditional approaches, implying that my experience was no longer relevant in the age of social media and digital engagement. Marcus would explain restaurant trends as if I couldn't possibly understand the complexities of modern food service, despite my having fed hundreds of customers through my catering work over the years. These subtle dismissals accumulated into a larger pattern of condescension that was particularly painful because it was wrapped in apparent kindness. They weren't openly rude or hostile. Instead, they treated me like a well-meaning elderly relative whose outdated perspectives needed to be gently managed. The assumption seemed to be that I had served my purpose by providing startup capital and should now step back to let the younger generation handle the sophisticated aspects of business operations. The financial dynamics of our relationship became increasingly uncomfortable as well. During the restaurant's first year, Marcus had insisted on paying me a modest return on my investment, treating me as a legitimate business partner, rather than just a family member who had provided a gift. By 2023, those payments had become irregular and smaller, with explanations about cash flow challenges and the need to reinvest profits into restaurant improvement. I wasn't entirely surprised by the financial pressures. I understood that restaurants operated on thin margins, and that unexpected expenses were common. What troubled me was the lack of communication about these decisions. Instead of discussing the financial situation openly and collaboratively, Marcus would simply inform me that a particular month's payment would be delayed or reduced. I felt like I was being managed rather than consulted, treated as a creditor to be pacified rather than a partner whose input might be valuable. The most painful aspect of this erosion was how it affected my relationship with Marcus personally. Since his father's death, we had maintained a close bond based on mutual respect and genuine affection. I had always been careful not to be an overbearing mother, encouraging his independence while remaining available for support when needed. Our adult relationship had felt balanced and healthy, with both of us contributing value to each other's lives. Now, however, our interactions felt increasingly one-sided. Marcus would call when he needed something, whether it was advice about handling a difficult employee, help with a catering order that Sage and Stone couldn't accommodate, or simply someone to listen to his work-related stress. But when I tried to share my own experiences or concerns, he seemed impatient or distracted. I began to feel like I existed primarily to serve his needs, rather than as an independent person whose life and perspectives mattered in their own right. This dynamic was particularly evident during a dinner we shared in late September 20. Marcus had called asking if he could come over to discuss some restaurant challenges, and I had prepared his favorite meal and cleared my evening schedule to focus on whatever support he needed. He arrived looking stressed and immediately launched into a detailed account of staffing problems, supplier issues, and customer complaints that were affecting Sage and Stone's operation. I listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions, and offered practical suggestions based on my own experience managing employees and dealing with vendors. Marcus seemed grateful for the conversation, and by the end of the evening, he appeared more relaxed and optimistic about addressing the restaurant's challenge. As he was preparing to leave, I mentioned that I had been dealing with some stress of my own related to a difficult catering client who was making unreasonable demands and threatening to damage my reputation if I didn't accommodate her request. Marcus's response was a polite nod and a generic comment about difficult customers being part of the business. He didn't ask for details about the situation, didn't offer advice or support, and didn't seem to recognize that I might benefit from the same kind of thoughtful listening and problem-solving discussion that I had just provided for him. Within minutes, he was heading toward the door, thanking me for the meal and the conversation while making it clear that he was ready to end the evening now that his needs had been addressed. That night, I sat in my kitchen cleaning up the dishes and reflecting on how our relationship had changed. The young man who had once sought my wisdom and valued my experience was now treating me like a resource to be accessed when convenient and ignored when not needed. The mother who had sacrificed her financial security for his dreams was being relegated to the role of supportive audience for his achievements. I began to pay closer attention to how Marcus and Vanessa spoke about their future plans and how I fit into their vision of success. Their conversations about potential restaurant expansion, travel opportunities, and lifestyle goals rarely included references to family relationships or obligations. They talked about their 5-year plan as if they were completely independent actors, whose decisions affected only themselves. This perspective was perhaps most evident in their approach to holidays and family traditions. In previous years, Marcus had been enthusiastic about celebrating my birthday, Father's Day in memory of James, and other occasions that honored our family history and relationship. In 2023, these celebrations became perfunctory obligations that seemed to interfere with their social calendar rather than meaningful opportunities for connection. When I suggested hosting Thanksgiving dinner in November 2023, Vanessa explained that they had been invited to join her family in Aspen for a long weekend ski trip. She presented this as an exciting opportunity that I should be happy for them to enjoy, rather than recognizing that it meant abandoning our family tradition for their convenience. When I expressed disappointment, Marcus said I was being possessive, and that I should understand their need to build relationships with Vanessa's family as well. The comment about being possessive stung particularly deeply because it mischaracterized my feelings entirely. I wasn't trying to control their choices or prevent them from having relationships with Vanessa's family. I was simply hoping to maintain some priority in my son's life, especially during holidays that had traditionally been important to our family. The fact that Marcus couldn't distinguish between reasonable expectations for family loyalty and possessive behavior suggested how far his perspective on our relationship had shifted. As 2023 drew to a close, I found myself in an increasingly isolated position within my own family dynamic. The restaurant that I had made possible was thriving and receiving recognition, but I was being systematically excluded from both the credit for its success and the benefits of its achievement. Marcus and Vanessa were building their adult life together with apparent confidence and optimism, but they seemed to view me as a peripheral figure whose role was to provide support when requested and remain quietly satisfied with their accomplishment. The most troubling aspect of this situation was not the financial implications, though those were significant, but the emotional cost of being devalued by the person I loved most in the world. I had spent decades building my identity around being a devoted mother who would sacrifice anything for her son's happiness and success. Now I was discovering that this devotion was not being reciprocated with the respect and consideration I had expected and deserved. During the quiet weeks between Christmas and New Year's, I spent considerable time reflecting on what had gone wrong and what options I had for addressing the situation. I could continue accepting the status quo, hoping that Marcus and Vanessa would eventually recognize my contributions and adjust their treatment of me accordingly. I could confront them directly about their behavior, risking a conflict that might damage our relationships permanently. Or I could begin to quietly reassess my own priorities and make changes that would protect my interests and dignity. As my 60th birthday approached in March 2024, I realized that this milestone represented more than just another year of life. It was an opportunity to evaluate whether the choices I had made in service of my son's dreams had been worth the personal cost I was now paying. The devoted mother who had sacrificed everything for Marcus's success was beginning to wonder whether it was time to redirect some of that devotion toward protecting and honoring herself. The birthday celebration that Marcus and Vanessa were planning would become the catalyst for a reckoning that none of us anticipated. The woman who had quietly accepted diminishing respect and recognition was about to discover what happened when someone pushed her patience past its breaking point. The family dynamics that had been shifting gradually over the course of a year were about to face a test that would reveal the true nature of our relationships and force all of us to confront the consequences of taking someone's love and support for granted. What Marcus and Vanessa didn't realize was that the soft-spoken, accommodating mother they had grown comfortable dismissing possessed the same strength and strategic thinking that had carried her through widowhood, single parenthood, and decades of independent business ownership. The woman who had built a successful life from nothing after losing her husband was still fully capable of protecting her interests when the people she loved failed to respect the value of her contributions to their success. The birthday that was supposed to celebrate 6 decades of life and accomplishment was about to become the moment when I finally decided that my own well-being and dignity were just as important as my son's happiness, and that love without respect was not sustainable for any relationship. Even the bond between a devoted mother and the child she had sacrificed everything to support. My 60th birthday was set for March 15th, a Friday that I had been quietly anticipating for months. I hadn't made any specific requests or demands about how I wanted to celebrate, but I had mentioned to Marcus several times that this milestone felt particularly significant to me. 60 years represented not just longevity but survival, resilience, and the accumulation of wisdom through decades of challenges and triumph. I had hoped this birthday would be an opportunity for reflection and recognition of the life I had built and the contributions I had made to my family's success. 3 weeks before my birthday, I called Marcus to ask if he and Vanessa had given any thought to celebrating together. I suggested that we could have dinner at Sage and Stone, which would allow me to enjoy the restaurant I had helped create while giving them the convenience of celebrating at their workplace. Alternatively, I offered to host a dinner at my house, preparing all of Marcus's favorite dishes and creating an intimate family gathering that honored our history and traditions. Marcus's response was non-committal and distracted. He said they would definitely do something nice for my birthday, but that he needed to check their calendar and get back to me with specific plans. When I asked if there were any scheduling conflicts I should be aware of, he mentioned that they had several busy weeks ahead with restaurant events and personal commitments, but assured me that they would make time for a proper celebration. A week later, I still hadn't heard back from Marcus about birthday plans, so I called again. This time, Vanessa answered his phone and explained that Marcus was in the middle of a staff meeting but that she could help with whatever I needed. When I asked about my birthday celebration, there was a brief pause before she said they were still figuring out the details and would call me back within a few days with a definite plan. The promised callback never came. By the beginning of March, just 2 weeks before my birthday, I was growing concerned that they had forgotten entirely or were avoiding the conversation for reasons I couldn't understand. I decided to visit the restaurant during a quiet Tuesday afternoon to speak with them directly about the situation. When I arrived at Sage and Stone, I found Marcus in the kitchen preparing for the evening service and Vanessa in the front office area working on what appeared to be social media content for the restaurant. They both seemed genuinely pleased to see me, and we chatted casually about business operations and recent customer feedback for several minutes before I brought up the birthday conversation. Marcus immediately looked uncomfortable and glanced toward Vanessa as if seeking guidance about how to respond. Vanessa set down her phone and took on the role of spokesperson, explaining that they had been discussing my birthday and wanted to plan something really special but were dealing with some scheduling complications that made it difficult to commit to specific arrangements. When I asked what kind of complications they were facing, Vanessa hesitated before explaining that March 15th was also her birthday. She said this with an apologetic smile, as if the timing was an unfortunate coincidence that created an unavoidable conflict rather than something that could be easily managed with thoughtful planning. I was surprised by this revelation, not because I begrudged Vanessa her own birthday celebration, but because in nearly 4 years of knowing her, the shared birthday date had never been mentioned. We had celebrated her birthday in previous years, without any reference to the proximity to my own, and I couldn't understand why this coincidence was suddenly presenting an insurmountable scheduling challenge. Marcus jumped in to explain that Vanessa's family had planned a big celebration for her 28th birthday, including extended family members flying in from out of state and a weekend of activities that would require significant time and attention. He said they felt torn between family obligations and wanted to make sure both birthdays received appropriate recognition. The way Marcus presented this dilemma revealed everything I needed to know about how he perceived the relative importance of these two celebrations. Vanessa's birthday was described as a big celebration with elaborate planning and family coordination, while mine was treated as a competing obligation that created an unfortunate burden for them to manage. The assumption seemed to be that I would understand and accommodate their need to prioritize Vanessa's celebration over mine. I asked directly whether they were saying that they couldn't celebrate both birthdays either on the same day or on separate occasions during the same week. Vanessa responded with an explanation about how overwhelming it would be to try to coordinate multiple family celebrations in such a short time frame, especially given their demanding work schedule at the restaurant. What became clear during this conversation was not that celebrating both birthdays was logistically impossible, but that Marcus and Vanessa had decided that Vanessa's birthday deserved their primary attention and emotional energy. My celebration was being treated as a secondary obligation that would have to be fitted around the margins of their more important priority. The most painful moment came when Marcus tried to soften this message by suggesting that we could do something low-key for my birthday either the week before or the week after Vanessa's celebration. He proposed taking me to dinner at a restaurant in my neighborhood, something that would require minimal planning or coordination and wouldn't interfere with their more elaborate arrangements for Vanessa. I sat there processing this proposal and feeling a deep sense of disappointment that went far beyond the specific birthday arrangement. The son who had once insisted on making my birthday special, who had handwritten cards expressing gratitude for my sacrifices and support, was now offering me the equivalent of a consolation prize while reserving the real celebration for his wife. The comparison was particularly striking because I knew how much effort and expense had gone into Vanessa's previous birthday celebration. Marcus had closed the restaurant early on her 27th birthday to host a private party with their friends, complete with a custom menu and professional photography. They had taken a long weekend trip to Napa Valley for her 26th birthday, posting elaborate social media content about their romantic getaway and culinary adventure. Now for her 28th birthday, they were apparently planning an event significant enough to require flying in extended family members and coordinating multiple days of activities. Meanwhile, my 60th birthday, which represented 6 decades of life including 26 years of single motherhood and the financial sacrifice that had made their restaurant possible, was being offered a simple dinner at a neighborhood restaurant scheduled around their convenience. I told Marcus and Vanessa that I needed to think about their proposal and would get back to them about what kind of celebration would work for me. I could see relief in their faces, as if they had been dreading a difficult conversation and were pleased that I was being reasonable about the scheduling conflict. As I drove home from the restaurant that afternoon, I felt a clarity that had been building for months finally crystallize into certainty. This wasn't really about birthday celebrations or scheduling conflict. It was about respect, priorities, and the fundamental question of how Marcus valued his relationship with me compared to other relationships in his life. The fact that he could propose celebrating my 60th birthday with a casual dinner while coordinating an elaborate multi-day celebration for Vanessa's 28th revealed everything I needed to know about where I stood in his hierarchy of important relationships. The mother who had sacrificed her financial security and years of her life to make his dreams possible was now being offered the same level of recognition he might give to a favorite aunt or family friend. That evening, I sat in my living room looking through photo albums that chronicled Marcus's childhood and young adulthood. There were pictures of birthday celebrations I had organized for him over the years, often stretching my limited budget to create memorable experiences that honored his interests and achievements. I had handmade decorations, baked elaborate cakes, and invited his friends for parties that sometimes cost me a week's worth of grocery money. Looking at those photos, I remembered the joy I had felt in creating special moments for my son, the satisfaction of seeing his happiness and excitement on his special day. I had never calculated the cost or expected reciprocal treatment, but I had assumed that the love and effort I invested in his happiness would be remembered and honored when the opportunity arose. Now I was being offered a token gesture that felt more like an obligation being discharged than a genuine celebration of my life and contribution. The contrast between what I had given and what I was being offered was stark enough to force me to confront some uncomfortable truths about how our relationship had evolved. Over the next few days, I found myself paying attention to how Marcus and Vanessa discussed their birthday plans when they thought I wasn't listening. During a phone conversation with Marcus that was ostensibly about restaurant business, I could hear Vanessa in the background talking excitedly about menu planning for her birthday dinner and coordinating travel arrangements for her visiting family members. The enthusiasm and attention to detail that went into planning Vanessa's celebration stood in sharp contrast to the reluctant accommodation they were offering for mine. It wasn't that I begrudged Vanessa her special day or expected Marcus to love me more than his wife, but the disparity in effort and emotional investment was impossible to ignore. I also began to notice how they discussed the birthday conflict with other people. During a casual conversation with one of my neighbors who occasionally dined at Sage and Stone, she mentioned that Vanessa had told her about the crazy coincidence of sharing a birthday with Marcus's mother and how stressful it was to try to manage everyone's expectations during such a busy time. The fact that Vanessa was discussing our family's private birthday arrangements with restaurant customers, and framing the situation as a burden she was graciously trying to manage, revealed a lot about how she perceived her role in the conflict. She wasn't struggling with how to honor both relationships appropriately, she was managing the inconvenience of having to accommodate my expectations, while pursuing her own priorities. A week before my birthday, Marcus called to confirm the dinner arrangements he had proposed. He had made reservations at an Italian restaurant in my neighborhood for the Saturday evening following my actual birthday, and he wanted to make sure the timing would work for me. His tone was businesslike and efficient, as if he was checking an item off his to-do list rather than planning a meaningful celebration for someone he loved. When I asked about the specific timing, Marcus explained that they would need to keep the dinner relatively short because they had to get up early Sunday morning to drive to the mountains for the final day of Vanessa's birthday weekend. The subtext was clear. My celebration was being scheduled around the margins of their more important plans, and I should be grateful for whatever time they could spare. That conversation was the moment when something fundamental shifted in my thinking about the entire situation. I realized that I had been approaching this birthday conflict as if it were a misunderstanding that could be resolved through better communication or more flexible planning. In reality, it was a reflection of deeper changes in how Marcus viewed our relationship and his obligations to me as his mother. The son who had once prioritized my feelings and well-being was now comfortable treating me as a secondary consideration, whose needs could be accommodated after more important relationships had been satisfied. The young man who had benefited from my unconditional support and sacrifice was now offering me conditional attention based on his convenience and availability. I began to understand that this birthday situation was not an isolated incident, but rather a clear demonstration of how Marcus intended to manage family relationships going forward. I would be included and honored when it was convenient and didn't conflict with other priorities. But I could not expect to be treated as a primary relationship deserving of significant time, effort, or emotional investment. This realization was painful but also clarifying. For months I had been struggling to understand why I felt increasingly marginalized and unappreciated in my interactions with Marcus and Vanessa. The birthday conflict provided a concrete example of how they had repositioned me in their hierarchy of important relationships, and it forced me to decide how I wanted to respond to this new dynamic. I could accept the diminished role they were offering me, grateful for whatever attention and inclusion I received and careful not to make demands that might strain our relationship further. I could attempt to have a direct conversation about my feelings and expectations, hoping that Marcus would recognize the unfairness of his treatment and make adjustments accordingly. Or I could begin to reconsider my own priorities and investments, protecting my interests and dignity even if it meant accepting less closeness with my son. The morning of my actual birthday, March 15th, I woke up with a sense of anticipation that had nothing to do with celebration plans. I had spent the previous week thinking carefully about my situation and had reached some conclusions about how I wanted to handle the relationship dynamics that had become so problematic. Marcus called that morning to wish me happy birthday and confirm our dinner plans for the following evening. His call was brief and cheerful, but there was an underlying tone of obligation rather than genuine excitement about celebrating together. When I thanked him for remembering my birthday, he seemed slightly puzzled, as if the idea that he might forget was absurd. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table drinking coffee and reflecting on how different this birthday felt from previous years. Instead of anticipation and joy, I felt a kind of resigned clarity about the changes in my family relationships and what I needed to do to protect my own well-being going forward. The woman who had spent 6 decades prioritizing other people's needs and happiness was finally ready to consider what it might mean to make her own priorities the center of her decision-making. The mother who had sacrificed everything for her son's success was beginning to understand that unconditional love did not require accepting unconditional disrespect. As I prepared for what I suspected would be a perfunctory birthday dinner with Marcus and Vanessa, I found myself thinking not about what I hoped to receive from them, but about what I was prepared to give and what I was no longer willing to tolerate. The conversation that would unfold over dinner the following evening would test whether our family relationships could be rebuilt on a foundation of mutual respect, or whether I would need to chart a new course that prioritized my own dignity and well-being. The birthday celebration that was supposed to honor my life and accomplishments was about to become the catalyst for a reckoning that would change everything about how we related to each other. The devoted mother who had always put her son's needs first was finally ready to consider what it might mean to put herself first, and the consequences of that shift would reshape our family dynamic in ways that none of us could anticipate. The Saturday evening dinner at Romano's felt like a performance where everyone knew their roles but no one was particularly invested in the outcome. Marcus and Vanessa arrived 15 minutes late, apologizing about traffic from Vanessa's birthday celebration that had run longer than expected. They both looked slightly tired but satisfied, carrying the relaxed energy of people who had just finished enjoying themselves thoroughly. Vanessa was wearing a beautiful emerald dress that I hadn't seen before, along with delicate gold jewelry that caught the restaurant's ambient lighting. She looked radiant and happy, glowing with the satisfaction of someone who had been properly celebrated and honored. Marcus appeared equally content, dressed in the navy blazer I had given him for Christmas 2 years earlier, looking every inch the successful restaurateur who had just hosted a memorable family gathering. As we settled into our table, Vanessa immediately began sharing highlights from her birthday celebration with an enthusiasm that was both genuine and completely oblivious to the context. She described the surprise brunch her family had organized that morning, complete with a live jazz musician and custom cocktails named after her childhood nickname. She showed me photos on her phone of the elaborate floral arrangements, the multi-tiered cake decorated with edible gold leaf, and the group photos of extended family members who had traveled from across the country to celebrate with her. Marcus contributed enthusiastically to this recount, as describing the speech Vanessa's father had given about her accomplishments and potential, the thoughtful gifts she had received, and the dinner reservations they had secured at an exclusive steakhouse in downtown Denver for the following evening. He spoke with pride and affection about his wife's special day, clearly delighted that everything had gone according to plan and that Vanessa felt properly honored by her family. I listened politely to this detailed account while processing the stark contrast between the celebration they were describing and the modest dinner we were currently sharing. The difference wasn't just in scale or expense, though those disparities were obvious, and it was in the emotional investment and attention to detail that had gone into making Vanessa feel valued and special on her birthday. When our server approached to take drink orders, Marcus suggested we start with a bottle of wine to properly celebrate my birthday. He selected a mid-range Chianti without consulting me about my preferences, then raised his glass in a toast that felt more dutiful than heartfelt. He spoke about my being a wonderful mother and expressed gratitude for my support and love over the years, but the words felt scripted and generic rather than personal and specific. During dinner, the conversation remained focused primarily on restaurant business and their upcoming plans. Vanessa mentioned that they were considering expanding Sage & Stone's catering services, potentially competing directly with the small catering business I had built over decades. She presented this as an exciting opportunity without seeming to recognize that it might affect my own livelihood or that discussing it during my birthday dinner was particularly insensitive. Marcus elaborated on their expansion ideas, explaining how they could leverage the restaurant's growing reputation to book larger events and corporate functions. He spoke with the same enthusiasm he had once reserved for discussing plans we made together, but now I was clearly positioned as an audience for their ambitions, rather than a collaborator or advisor whose input might be valuable. When I attempted to share some insights from my own catering experience, suggesting potential challenges they might encounter and strategies that had worked well for me over the years, their responses were polite but dismissive. Vanessa thanked me for the tips while explaining that their approach would be more sophisticated than traditional catering services. Marcus nodded along, adding that they were planning to target a different demographic than my typical client. The implication was clear: my decades of experience in food service were quaint and outdated compared to their modern, upscale approach to the industry. The woman who had built a successful business from nothing and had provided the capital that made their restaurant possible was being patronized by two young people who had been in the industry for less than 3 years. As the evening progressed, I found myself observing the dynamics between Marcus and Vanessa with new clarity. They functioned as a unit, finishing each other's sentences and supporting each other's perspectives with the kind of seamless partnership that excluded outside input. When Vanessa made a comment that was subtly critical of my catering business or my suggestions, Marcus would nod in agreement rather than defending me or offering a more balanced perspective. This pattern revealed how completely Marcus had transferred his primary loyalty from our family relationship to his marriage, While I understood and even appreciated that his wife should be his priority, I was troubled by his apparent inability to maintain respect for me while supporting her. It seemed that honoring Vanessa required diminishing me, as if our relationships existed in competition rather than as complementary parts of his life. The most telling moment came when our server brought out a small birthday cake that Marcus had apparently arranged in advance. It was a simple chocolate cake with "Happy Birthday Rose" written in white frosting, clearly ordered from the restaurant's standard dessert menu rather than customized for the occasion. As the server placed it in front of me, I couldn't help but remember the elaborate multi-tiered creation Vanessa had shown me photos of just hours earlier. Marcus and Vanessa sang a perfunctory happy birthday and encouraged me to make a wish before blowing out the single candle. As I sat there looking at the modest cake and feeling the weight of their expectant stares, I realized that my wish was not for anything they could give me. I wished for the strength to navigate the difficult decisions I was beginning to understand I would need to make about our relationship and my own future. After dinner, as we stood outside the restaurant preparing to part ways, Vanessa hugged me briefly and thanked me for understanding about the scheduling craziness with their birthday. She spoke as if I had been gracious about an unavoidable conflict rather than accepting a clear statement about my relative importance in their lives. Marcus echoed her sentiment, expressing appreciation for my flexibility and promising that they would plan something really special for my next birthday. The promise felt hollow and patronizing, as if they believed I would forget about this year's treatment once enough time had passed. They seemed to expect that I would continue to be available and supportive regardless of how they chose to prioritize our relationship, confident that my maternal love would override any concerns about respect or reciprocity. As I drove home that evening, I felt a profound shift in my perspective that went beyond disappointment about the birthday celebration. The dinner had crystallized months of growing concerns about how Marcus and Vanessa viewed me and my role in their lives. I was clearly seen as a supporting character in their story, rather than a person whose own needs and feelings deserved serious consideration. The next morning, I woke up with an unusual sense of purpose and clarity. Instead of feeling sorry for myself or dwelling on the previous evening's disappointments, I found myself thinking strategically about my situation and what options I had for protecting my interests and dignity going forward. The woman who had survived widowhood and built a successful business was still very much alive within me, even if I had allowed that strength to be overshadowed by my devotion to my son's happiness. I spent the morning reviewing the financial documents related to my investment in Sage and Stone, documents I hadn't examined carefully in over a year. As I spread the papers across my kitchen table, I began to understand aspects of my situation that I had previously overlooked or ignored. The investment structure was more complex than I had remembered, with multiple components that gave me various rights and protections as both a family member and a business partner. The most significant discovery was related to the second mortgage I had taken on my house to provide Marcus and Vanessa with startup capital. The loan documents included provisions that I had forgotten about, including the right to call in the debt under certain circumstances, and protections that ensured my investment would be secured against the restaurant's asset. My attorney had insisted on these safeguards at the time, explaining that even family business arrangements needed proper legal protections. I also found documents related to Vanessa's personal financial situation that Marcus had asked me to co-sign during the restaurant's early months. When they needed additional working capital to cover unexpected renovation costs, Vanessa had applied for a personal credit line that required a guarantor with established credit and assets. I had agreed to co-sign without fully understanding the implications, trusting that they would manage the debt responsibly and that my involvement would be temporary. Reading through these documents now, I realized that Vanessa had continued to use this credit line extensively, accumulating a balance of nearly $40,000 that was secured against my house and my personal assets. The monthly statements had been sent to her address, so I hadn't been tracking the balance or the terms of repayment. As her guarantor, I was ultimately responsible for this debt if she defaulted, but I also had legal rights that could be exercised if the arrangement was being misused. The more I studied these financial documents, the more I understood that my relationship with Marcus and Vanessa was not just personal and emotional, but also legal and financial in ways that gave me considerable leverage if I chose to exercise it. The naive mother who had signed papers without fully protecting her interests had inadvertently created a situation where the ungrateful children who were taking her for granted had made themselves vulnerable to consequences they probably didn't fully understand. I called my attorney, Janet Morrison, who had handled the original investment documents and who had been advising me on financial matters since James's death. Janet was a sharp woman in her 50s who specialized in small business law and had always been protective of my interests, sometimes more than I had been myself. When I explained that I wanted to review all of my financial arrangements with Marcus and Vanessa, she immediately offered to meet with me at her office. During our meeting, Janet listened carefully as I described the changes in my relationship with Marcus and Vanessa, and my growing concerns about being taken for granted despite my significant financial contributions to their success. She reviewed the documents I had brought and explained various options I had for protecting my interests or modifying the arrangements if necessary. The conversation with Janet was illuminating in ways I hadn't expected. She pointed out that my investments in Sage and Stone had been structured more generously than typical business arrangements, with minimal protections for my interests and maximum flexibility for Marcus and Vanessa to use the capital without oversight or accountability. She suggested that I had prioritized family harmony over financial prudence, which was understandable but had left me in a potentially vulnerable position. More importantly, Janet explained that Vanessa's personal debt situation was more serious than I had realized. The credit line I had co-signed was just one of several financial obligations that Vanessa had accumulated, and there were signs that she was struggling to manage her overall debt load responsibly. Janet recommended that I obtain a full credit report to understand the complete scope of Vanessa's financial commitments and my potential exposure as a guarantor. The credit report revealed a troubling pattern of financial irresponsibility that explained why Vanessa had needed a co-signer for the restaurant-related credit line. She had accumulated substantial debt across multiple credit cards, had missed payments on several accounts, and had a credit score that was much lower than I had imagined. The woman who presented herself as a successful marketing professional was actually struggling with significant financial problems that she had been hiding from everyone, including Marcus. Janet pointed out that this information gave me considerable leverage in my relationship with Marcus and Vanessa should I choose to use it. As a guarantor for Vanessa's largest debt, I could demand immediate repayment, require restructuring of the terms, or exercise other rights that would force them to take my interests more seriously. The question was whether I wanted to use financial pressure to demand better treatment, or whether I preferred to address our relationship problems through direct communication. I spent several days considering my options and what outcome I actually wanted to achieve. I could continue trying to maintain family harmony by accepting their treatment and hoping it would improve over time. I could confront them directly about my feelings and expectations, risking conflict but potentially clarifying our relationship dynamic. Or I could begin to quietly protect my own interests while allowing them to experience the consequences of taking my support for granted. The more I thought about the situation, the more I realized that direct confrontation was unlikely to produce lasting change in how Marcus and Vanessa viewed me. Their behavior toward me had evolved gradually over months, reflecting deep-seated attitudes about my value and importance that wouldn't be easily modified through conversation. If they didn't naturally respect my contributions and consider my feelings, being asked to do so would likely produce resentment rather than genuine appreciation. I decided to begin making quiet changes that would protect my interests and demonstrate my value without dramatic confrontations or ultimatums. The devoted mother who had always prioritized her son's happiness was going to start prioritizing her own well-being, and the consequences of that shift would teach Marcus and Vanessa lessons about respect and gratitude that they apparently needed to learn. My first step was to contact the credit line company and request detailed information about Vanessa's account activity and payment history. As the guarantor, I had rights to this information and could monitor how the debt was being managed. What I discovered was that Vanessa had been making only minimum payments and had recently charged additional expenses that brought the balance to its maximum limit. I also scheduled a meeting with the restaurant's accountant to review Sage and Stone's financial performance and understand how my investment was being used. While I had been receiving general updates about the restaurant's success, I had not been given access to detailed financial statements that would show actual revenues, expenses, and profit margin. As a major investor, I was entitled to this information and should have been receiving regular reports. The accountant's report revealed that while Sage and Stone was indeed successful in terms of customer traffic and positive reviews, the profit margins were much smaller than Marcus and Vanessa had suggested. Their expansion plans and lifestyle expenses were consuming most of the revenue, leaving little for the investor payments that had become sporadic over the past year. The restaurant was financially stable but not as profitable as they had implied when asking me to be patient about delayed investment return. Armed with this comprehensive understanding of both my legal rights and their financial vulnerabilities, I began to formulate a plan that would teach Marcus and Vanessa about consequences while protecting my own interests. The woman who had been treated as a convenient source of support was about to demonstrate that convenience could work both ways, and that respect was not just something she hoped to receive, but something she was prepared to demand. The birthday dinner that was supposed to be a celebration had instead become a catalyst for a fundamental reevaluation of our family relationships. The devoted mother who had always put her son's needs first was finally ready to consider what it might mean to put herself first, and the ungrateful children who had taken her generosity for granted were about to learn that their financial security depended on maintaining the goodwill of the woman they had been systematically disrespecting. The transformation began on a quiet Tuesday morning in early April, 3 weeks after my birthday dinner. I had spent those weeks carefully reviewing all the financial documents, consulting with Janet about my legal options, and observing Marcus and Vanessa's behavior with new eyes. What I saw confirmed everything I had suspected about their attitude toward me and their assumptions about my continued availability as their safety net. During those 3 weeks, neither Marcus nor Vanessa had called to check on me or follow up on the birthday celebration. There was no acknowledgement that the dinner might have felt perfunctory, no recognition that a 60th birthday deserved more attention than they had provided, and no apparent awareness that their behavior might have been hurtful. They seemed to consider the matter closed and successful, having fulfilled their obligation to celebrate my birthday without considering whether I had felt genuinely honored or appreciated. This silence was particularly striking because it contrasted sharply with their usual pattern of maintaining contact when they needed something from me. In previous months, Marcus would call regularly to discuss restaurant challenges, seek advice about business decisions, or simply vent about the stresses of entrepreneurship. Vanessa would text me photos of new menu items or restaurant events, apparently wanting to keep me informed about their successes and engaged with their professional lives. Now, with no immediate needs for my support or input, they had apparently forgotten about me entirely. The relationship that I had assumed was based on genuine affection and mutual interest was revealing itself to be primarily transactional, maintained when they needed something, and ignored when they didn't. On that Tuesday morning, I called Janet and asked her to proceed with exercising my rights as Vanessa's debt guarantor. I had decided that the time for hoping they would recognize my value on their own had passed, and that it was time to demonstrate the practical consequences of taking my support for granted. Janet explained that as the guarantor for Vanessa's $40,000 credit line, I could demand immediate payment of the full balance if I had concerns about the borrower's ability to manage the debt responsibly. Given Vanessa's pattern of making only minimum payments and her accumulation of additional debt on other accounts, Janet assured me that my concerns would be considered legitimate and legally justified. The demand letter was sent via certified mail to both Vanessa personally and to Sage and Stone's business address, since the debt had been incurred for restaurant-related expenses. The letter explained that based on my review of the account activity and payment history, I was exercising my right as guarantor to call in the debt immediately. Vanessa had 30 days to pay the full balance or provide acceptable alternative arrangements for securing the obligation. At the same time, I instructed Janet to send a separate letter to Marcus and Vanessa requesting a comprehensive financial review of Sage and Stone's operations and my investment in the restaurant. As a major investor who had provided over $100,000 in startup capital, I was entitled to detailed financial statements, profit and loss reports, and documentation of how my money had been used. The letter requested that this information be provided within 2 weeks so that I could evaluate the performance of my investment. These letters were not sent out of anger or vindictiveness, but rather as a businesslike assertion of rights that I had possessed all along but had chosen not to exercise out of family loyalty. The devoted mother who had trusted her son and his wife to treat her fairly was stepping back, and the savvy businesswoman who had built her own successful enterprise was stepping forward to protect her interests. I spent the week following the delivery of these letters, maintaining my normal routine while quietly preparing for the confrontation I knew was coming. I organized all of my financial documents, consulted with Janet about various scenarios that might unfold, and mentally prepared myself for the difficult conversations that would be necessary once Marcus and Vanessa realized the full scope of their financial exposure. The first response came not from Marcus or Vanessa directly, but from Vanessa's panicked phone call on Friday afternoon. She had clearly just received and read the demand letter about her personal debt, and her voice was shaking as she asked if there had been some kind of mistake or misunderstanding. I told her calmly that there was no mistake, and that I had simply decided to exercise my legal rights as her guarantor after reviewing the account activity and becoming concerned about the debt management. When she asked why I was doing this now, I explained that my recent examination of my financial arrangements had revealed several situations where my interests were not being adequately protected. Vanessa's response revealed just how little she had understood about the financial arrangements she had entered into or the obligations she had incurred. She seemed genuinely surprised that I had the right to demand immediate payment, and appeared to have assumed that the credit line was essentially a gift that could be managed at her convenience. The sophisticated marketing professional who had dismissed my business experience was struggling to understand basic concepts about debt and guarantor responsibility. When she asked if we could work out some kind of payment plan, I told her that would depend on several factors, including her willingness to address other aspects of our relationship that had become problematic. I suggested that she discuss the situation with Marcus and that they should plan to meet with me to address not just the immediate debt issue, but the broader questions about our family and business relationship. Marcus called within an hour of my conversation with Vanessa, and his tone was completely different from any I had heard from him in months. The casual dismissiveness that had characterized our recent interactions was replaced by urgent concern and barely controlled frustration. He wanted to know why I was suddenly creating problems and making demands that felt like threats against their financial stability. I told Marcus that I wasn't creating problems, but rather addressing problems that had been developing for quite some time. I explained that my role as both his mother and a significant investor in his business had been taken for granted to a degree that was no longer acceptable to me. The financial demands I was making were simply exercises of rights I had always possessed, but had chosen not to use, while I hoped our relationship issues could be resolved through better communication and mutual consideration. Marcus's response revealed how completely he had misunderstood the dynamics of our relationship and the foundation of their financial security. He seemed genuinely shocked that I had legal rights that could affect their business operations and personal finance. The young man who had been comfortable treating me as a peripheral figure in his life was suddenly confronting the reality that I held considerable power over his financial future. When he asked what I wanted from them, I told him that we needed to have a comprehensive conversation about our relationships, both personal and financial, and that this conversation should happen sooner rather than later. I suggested that they come to my house the following Sunday afternoon, when we could discuss these matters without the distractions and pressures of the restaurant environment. The tone of Marcus's voice changed noticeably as he realized that I was serious about enforcing my rights, and that this was not a negotiation he could manage with charm or dismissiveness. For the first time in months, he spoke to me with the kind of careful respect that he had shown during the early days of their restaurant planning, when he needed my support and approval for his business venture. The meeting was scheduled for Sunday at 2 o'clock, and I spent the intervening time preparing not just the documents and information I would need, but also mentally rehearsing the conversation I intended to have. This was not going to be an emotional confrontation where I expressed hurt feelings and hoped for apologies, but rather a business-like discussion where I clarified my expectations and the consequences of failing to meet them. Marcus and Vanessa arrived on time, both looking anxious and uncertain in a way I hadn't seen since the early days of their restaurant planning when they were seeking my initial investment. Vanessa was carrying a folder that appeared to contain financial documents, while Marcus looked tense and defensive, clearly uncomfortable with being summoned for what felt like a performance review. I had prepared coffee and arranged my living room to facilitate a serious conversation, with chairs positioned around the coffee table where I had organized various documents related to our financial arrangement. The atmosphere was formal and businesslike rather than familial, reflecting the nature of the discussion we needed to have. I began the conversation by thanking them for making time to meet and explaining that the recent financial demands were part of a larger reassessment of our relationships that had become necessary due to changes in how I was being treated and valued. I told them that I had no interest in punishing them or creating unnecessary conflict, but that I also could no longer accept being taken for granted while providing substantial financial support for their dreams and lifestyle. Marcus immediately tried to interrupt with assurances that they appreciated everything I had done, and that any impression of taking me for granted was unintentional and could be easily corrected. I held up my hand to stop him and explained that this conversation needed to be comprehensive and honest, not just a series of defensive responses and promises that might not be kept. I then walked them through a detailed review of my financial contributions to their restaurant and personal lives, including the initial investment, the ongoing support, and the various guarantees and co-signatures I had provided. As I presented specific numbers and dates, I could see both Marcus and Vanessa beginning to understand the full scope of their dependence on my financial backing and the vulnerability of their position if that support were withdrawn. The most revealing moment came when I presented documentation of Vanessa's debt situation, including not just the credit line I had guaranteed, but also her other financial obligations that I had discovered through my research. Vanessa's face went pale as she realized that I knew about debts she hadn't disclosed to Marcus, including credit card balances and personal loans that were affecting her credit rating and overall financial stability. Marcus looked stunned as I explained the extent of Vanessa's financial problems and his potential exposure as her husband to debts that could affect their joint assets and business operations. It became clear that Vanessa had been managing her financial difficulties privately, without fully informing Marcus about the scope of the problems or the risks they posed to their shared future. I then addressed the pattern of behavior that had led to this confrontation, describing specific incidents where I had felt dismissed, marginalized, or taken for granted despite my ongoing financial support for their success. I spoke calmly and factually about the birthday situation, the changes in how they communicated with me, and their apparent assumption that my support would continue regardless of how they treated me. The conversation that followed was difficult but necessary. Vanessa broke down in tears as she admitted that she had been struggling with debt management for several years and had been afraid to tell Marcus the full extent of the problem. She acknowledged that she had taken my financial support for granted and had not considered how her behavior might be affecting our relationship. Marcus was forced to confront the reality that his wife had been hiding significant financial problems from him and that his comfortable assumption about my unlimited support was not sustainable. He also had to acknowledge that his treatment of me had changed in ways that were disrespectful and hurtful, regardless of his intention. The discussion continued for nearly 3 hours, covering not just the immediate financial issues, but also the broader questions about family relationships, mutual respect, and the foundation for moving forward together. By the end of the conversation, several things had become clear to all of us. First, Vanessa would need to address her debt problems comprehensively, with full transparency to Marcus and with a realistic plan for repayment that didn't depend on my continued guarantees of her obligation. Second, Marcus and Vanessa would need to restructure their relationship with me, to acknowledge my contributions and treat me with the respect that my support had earned. Third, my role as an investor in Sage and Stone would need to be formalized with proper documentation, regular reporting, and clear expectations about returns on my investment. The casual family arrangement that had allowed them to use my money without accountability was no longer acceptable. Most importantly, our personal relationships would need to be rebuilt on a foundation of mutual respect and consideration, rather than the one-sided dynamic that had developed where I provided support while they pursued their own interests without regard for my feelings or needs. Over the following weeks, Marcus and Vanessa worked diligently to address the issues we had discussed and to demonstrate their commitment to rebuilding our relationships on healthier terms. Vanessa consolidated her debts and arranged for repayment plans that didn't require my continued guarantee, taking responsibility for financial problems she had previously tried to ignore or hide. Marcus began providing regular financial reports about Sage and Stone's performance and initiated formal documentation of my investment that protected my interests while providing clear expectations about returns and decision-making authority. More importantly, he made genuine efforts to restore the respectful, appreciative tone that had characterized our relationship before their success had led to taking me for granted. The restaurant continued to thrive, but now Marcus and Vanessa operated with a clearer understanding of the foundation that had made their success possible and the ongoing relationships that supported their achievement. They began including me more meaningfully in their plans and decisions, not just as a source of financial support but as a valued family member whose opinions and feelings matter. The birthday conflict that had triggered this confrontation was addressed the following year when Marcus and Vanessa planned an elaborate celebration for my 61st birthday that demonstrated genuine appreciation for my contributions to their success and their lives. The celebration included elements that reflected my interests and achievements, not just their convenience and preferences. More significantly, they began to understand that maintaining family relationships required ongoing attention and investment, not just crisis management when problems became too serious to ignore. The devoted mother who had sacrificed everything for her son's success had taught them that love without respect was not sustainable, and that taking someone for granted carried consequences that could threaten the very foundation of their shared future. My relationship with Marcus and Vanessa evolved into something more balanced and sustainable, based on mutual respect rather than one-sided devotion. I continued to support their dreams and success, but now that support was appreciated and reciprocated rather than simply expected and taken for granted. The woman who had been marginalized and dismissed despite her crucial contributions to their success had demonstrated that quiet strength could be more powerful than loud protest, and that sometimes the most effective way to teach someone about respect is to show them the consequences of losing. The devoted mother had learned to be devoted to herself as well as to her son, and the result was a family relationship that honored everyone's contributions and recognized everyone's work. The financial crisis that could have destroyed their restaurant and their marriage instead became an opportunity for growth and understanding that strengthened their relationships and secured their future on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine appreciation. The birthday that had seemed like such a small slight had revealed fundamental problems that needed to be addressed, and the resolution of those problems had created a family dynamic that was healthier and more sustainable for everyone involved. Marcus and Vanessa's success continued and expanded, but now it was built on honest recognition of the support that had made it possible and genuine appreciation for the people who had believed in their dreams when believing required real sacrifice and risk. The restaurant that had been funded by my financial sacrifice became a symbol of what could be achieved when family relationships were based on mutual respect and shared commitment to each other's success and happiness. As I sat in Sage and Stone one evening, watching Marcus work in the kitchen and Vanessa manage the front of house with the skill and passion that had made their restaurant a success, I felt a satisfaction that went beyond pride in their achievement. I felt the deeper satisfaction of knowing that our relationships had been tested and strengthened, that my contributions were recognized and valued, and that the love I had always felt for my son was now balanced by the respect I had learned to demand for myself. The woman who had been taken for granted had taught the people she loved most that her support was a gift to be treasured, not a resource to be exploited, and the result was a family bond that was stronger and more genuine than it had ever been before. The quiet revolution that had begun with a disappointing birthday dinner had transformed all of our lives in ways that created lasting happiness and mutual respect. The months following our confrontation brought changes that rippled through every aspect of our family dynamic, transforming not just how Marcus and Vanessa treated me, but how they understood the very nature of family relationships and mutual respect. The immediate crisis had been resolved, but the deeper work of rebuilding trust and establishing new patterns of interaction required sustained effort from all of us. Vanessa's journey toward financial responsibility became a particularly revealing aspect of this transformation. In the weeks after our meeting, she began working with a debt counselor to develop a comprehensive plan for addressing her financial obligation. The process forced her to confront patterns of spending and financial management that had been developing since her college years, when easy access to credit had masked underlying problems with budgeting and long-term planning. The debt consolidation process revealed the full scope of Vanessa's financial difficulties, which extended far beyond what any of us had initially understood. In addition to the $40,000 credit line I had guaranteed, she had accumulated nearly $25,000 in credit card debt across multiple accounts, had defaulted on a personal loan from her college years, and had been making only minimum payments on most of her obligations for over 2 years. Marcus was devastated to learn the extent of his wife's financial problems, not just because of the immediate implications for their shared future, but because of what the secrecy revealed about their communication and trust. He had been operating under the assumption that they were building their life together on a foundation of honesty and shared goals, only to discover that Vanessa had been struggling with serious problems that affected both of their financial security without his knowledge. The revelation of Vanessa's hidden debts also explained some of the tension I had been sensing in their relationship over the past year. What I had interpreted as growing confidence and success had actually been stress and anxiety about financial pressures that Vanessa was trying to manage privately. Her increasing distance from me and her defensive responses to my questions about the restaurant's finances had been symptoms of broader problems she was afraid to acknowledge or address. Working through these financial issues required Vanessa to develop new skills and perspectives that challenged some of the assumptions that had led to the problems in the first place. The debt counselor helped her understand the long-term consequences of minimum payments and high-interest debt, but also worked with her to identify the emotional and psychological factors that had contributed to her overspending and financial avoidance. One of the most significant revelations was that Vanessa's spending patterns were closely tied to feelings of insecurity about her social status and professional identity. Coming from a family that appeared financially comfortable, she had felt pressure to maintain a lifestyle that matched her background and aspirations, even when her actual income couldn't support those expenses. The restaurant's success had given her access to a social circle of successful young professionals, but keeping up with their lifestyles had required spending money she didn't have. This psychological dimension of Vanessa's financial problems helped explain some of her behavior toward me that had felt dismissive and condescending. Her need to project success and sophistication had led her to distance herself from anything that might seem ordinary or unsophisticated, including my traditional approaches to business and my modest lifestyle choice. Acknowledging her own financial struggles forced her to reconsider these attitudes and recognize the value of the practical wisdom I had developed through decades of careful financial management. The process of financial rehabilitation also required Vanessa to make significant changes to her lifestyle and spending habits. She sold the expensive jewelry and designer clothing that had been straining her budget, moved out of the upscale downtown loft that was costing far more than they could afford, and began tracking her expenses with the kind of detailed attention I had always applied to my own financial management. These changes were initially difficult for Vanessa, who had become accustomed to a lifestyle that projected success even when it wasn't financially sustainable. However, as she began to experience the relief of reducing her debt burden and the satisfaction of making real progress toward financial stability, her perspective on money and success began to shift in fundamental ways. Marcus's role in supporting Vanessa through this process, while also rebuilding his relationship with me, required him to develop new skills in balancing competing demands and maintaining multiple important relationships simultaneously. The young man who had previously assumed that supporting his wife meant automatically agreeing with her perspectives had to learn how to be loyal to their marriage while also maintaining respect and consideration for his mother. This balancing act was particularly challenging when it came to business decisions about Sage & Stone's operations and future direction. Vanessa's marketing expertise and social connections had been crucial to the restaurant's success, but her financial problems had also created some complications in their business relationship. Several vendors and service providers had extended credit to the restaurant based partly on Vanessa's personal guarantees, and her debt situation had raised questions about the restaurant's financial stability. Marcus had to navigate these business challenges while also managing the personal dynamics of our family relationship. He began scheduling regular meetings with me to discuss restaurant operations and financial performance, providing the kind of detailed reporting and collaborative decision-making that should have been in place from the beginning of my investment. These business conversations also became opportunities for us to rebuild our personal relationship on more solid ground. As Marcus shared the details of restaurant operations, staff management challenges, and strategic planning decisions, I was able to contribute insights and advice that drew on my decades of business experience. The mutual respect that had characterized our relationship during his childhood and young adulthood began to resurface as he rediscovered the value of my perspective and guidance. One of the most significant business decisions we made together was restructuring Sage & Stone's expansion plans to focus on sustainable growth rather than rapid scaling. Vanessa's original marketing strategy had emphasized aggressive expansion into catering services, multiple locations, and high-profile events that would maximize the restaurant's visibility and social media presence. However, the financial review I had requested revealed that these expansion plans would require additional capital investment and would increase the restaurant's operating risk significantly. Working together, Marcus and I developed a more conservative growth strategy that emphasized profitability and financial stability over rapid expansion. This approach meant slower growth and less dramatic increases in revenue, but it also meant that the restaurant would be better positioned to weather economic downturns or unexpected challenges without threatening the foundation of the business. The decision to scale back expansion plans was initially difficult for Vanessa, who had invested considerable effort in developing the marketing strategies and social connections that would have supported rapid growth. However, as she worked through her own financial rehabilitation and gained a better understanding of sustainable business practices, she began to appreciate the wisdom of building the restaurant's success on solid financial foundations rather than aggressive leveraging and expansion. This shift in business strategy also reflected broader changes in how all of us understood success and achievement. The previous focus on rapid growth, high-profile recognition, and lifestyle advancement was replaced by an emphasis on sustainable operations, genuine profitability, and long-term stability. These changes required patience and discipline, but they also created a more secure foundation for both the business and our family relationships. The summer following our confrontation brought opportunities to test these new dynamics during family gatherings and social situations. Marcus and Vanessa's approach to including me in their social circle changed significantly as they began to recognize that my experience and perspective could be assets rather than embarrassments in their professional and personal relationships. At a restaurant industry networking event in June, Vanessa introduced me not as Marcus's mother who had helped with startup costs, but as a successful entrepreneur who had built her own catering business and had provided strategic guidance for Sage & Stone's development. This introduction led to conversations with other restaurant owners and food service professionals who were interested in my insights about building sustainable businesses in competitive markets. The evening was revelatory for both Marcus and Vanessa, as they observed other professionals treating me with the kind of respect and interest that they had failed to show in recent months. Watching industry veterans seek my advice about staff management, vendor relationships, and customer service reminded them that my decades of experience represented valuable expertise rather than outdated perspectives. This networking event also provided opportunities for Marcus and Vanessa to observe how I conducted myself in professional settings, demonstrating skills and knowledge that they had overlooked or undervalued. My ability to ask thoughtful questions, offer practical suggestions, and build rapport with potential business partners impressed several attendees who expressed interest in collaborating with Sage & Stone on future projects. The success of this networking experience led to Marcus and Vanessa including me more regularly in business-related social events and professional development activities. Rather than treating me as a family obligation to be managed around their business activities, they began to recognize that I could be an asset who contributed to their professional success and reputation. These changes in how they viewed and included me professionally also translated into improvements in our personal relationships. The respect that they began showing for my business expertise carried over into greater consideration for my feelings, opinions, and preferences in family situations. The most visible demonstration of these changes came with the planning for my 61st birthday celebration. Rather than the perfunctory dinner that had characterized my 60th birthday, Marcus and Vanessa invested considerable time and effort in creating a celebration that honored my interests, achievements, and contributions to their success. The celebration they planned included elements that reflected their genuine understanding of what would be meaningful to me, rather than what would be convenient for their schedule or impressive to their social circle. They arranged for the party to be held at Sage and Stone on a Sunday evening when the restaurant was normally closed, but they decorated the space and prepared a menu that reflected my favorite foods and family traditions, rather than the restaurant's typical upscale offering. The guest list included not just their friends and professional contacts, but also people from my own social circle, including members of my book club, neighbors from my street, and clients from my catering business who had become friends over the years. This inclusive approach demonstrated their recognition that I had my own life and relationships that deserved acknowledgement and celebration. The speeches and toasts during the celebration focused on my accomplishments as an entrepreneur, my dedication as a mother, and my wisdom as a family advisor, rather than generic comments about my being a wonderful person or supportive. Marcus spoke specifically about lessons I had taught him about business management, financial responsibility, and treating employees with respect. Vanessa acknowledged my role in making their restaurant possible and expressed genuine gratitude for my patience and guidance during her financial rehabilitation. The most meaningful aspect of the celebration was not the expense or effort that went into planning it, but the genuine appreciation and respect that it demonstrated. For the first time in over a year, I felt truly seen and valued by Marcus and Vanessa, recognized not just as someone who had provided financial support, but as a person whose experience, wisdom, and love had contributed to their success in multiple ways. The months following this birthday celebration continued to bring evidence that the changes in our relationships were genuine and sustainable rather than temporary responses to the financial crisis I had precipitated. Marcus began calling me regularly, not just when he needed advice or support, but simply to maintain connection and share news about his life and work. These conversations revealed aspects of Marcus's experience that he had been keeping private during the period when our relationship had become strained. The pressures of running a restaurant, managing employees, and maintaining the high standards that Sage and Stone's reputation required had been more challenging than he had admitted, even to himself. Having someone he could talk to honestly about these challenges without feeling judged or criticized was clearly valuable to him. Vanessa's transformation was perhaps even more dramatic than Marcus's, as she worked to rebuild not just her financial stability but also her relationships with family members she had alienated through her previous behavior. The process of confronting her debt problems had forced her to examine other patterns of behavior that had been creating problems in various relationships. She began making efforts to connect with me on a more personal level, asking about my interests, my business experiences, and my perspectives on topics that had nothing to do with the restaurant or their immediate needs. These conversations revealed aspects of Vanessa's personality and background that I hadn't previously understood, helping me see her as a complete person rather than just someone who had been taking my support for granted. One particularly meaningful conversation occurred during a quiet afternoon when Vanessa stopped by my house to drop off some documents related to her debt consolidation process. Instead of leaving immediately after completing her business, she accepted my offer of coffee and spent nearly 2 hours talking about her childhood, her family relationships, and her fears about financial security that had contributed to her problematic spending pattern. During this conversation, Vanessa revealed that her family's apparent financial comfort had been largely illusory, maintained through debt and financial manipulation that had created significant stress and instability during her teenage years. Her father's business had experienced several financial crises that threatened their lifestyle and security, but these problems had been hidden from extended family and friends through careful management of appearances and increasing reliance on credit. This background helped explain Vanessa's complicated relationship with money and success, as well as her tendency to use spending and lifestyle choices to project security and status that she didn't necessarily feel internally. Understanding these underlying factors allowed me to have more compassion for her struggles and to recognize that her previous dismissive behavior toward me had been motivated by insecurity rather than genuine arrogance or disrespect. The financial rehabilitation process also provided opportunities for me to share practical knowledge and skills that helped Vanessa develop more effective approaches to money management. My decades of experience in careful budgeting, strategic saving, and building financial security despite limited resources became valuable resources for someone who had never learned these skills during her privileged but financially unstable upbringing. Teaching Vanessa about practical financial management created a new dimension to our relationship that was based on mutual respect and genuine value exchange rather than obligation or family courtesy. She was eager to learn strategies that could help her avoid future financial problems, and I was pleased to share knowledge that I had developed through years of necessity and careful planning. These teaching opportunities also allowed Vanessa to understand the skills and discipline that had made my catering business successful and had enabled me to provide the financial support that made Sage and Stone possible. Rather than seeing my business as small-scale or unsophisticated compared to their restaurant venture, she began to appreciate the complexity and expertise required to build and maintain a profitable service business over multiple decades. As autumn approached, the restaurant industry in Denver began preparing for the busy holiday season that would test all of the changes we had implemented over the previous month. The financial restructuring, improved communication, and rebuilt relationships would need to withstand the pressures of increased business volume, staff management challenges, and the complex logistics of holiday catering and special events. Marcus and Vanessa's approach to managing these seasonal pressures reflected the maturity and wisdom they had developed through the process of confronting their financial and relationship problems. Instead of trying to maximize revenue through aggressive booking and expansion, they focused on maintaining quality and sustainability while serving their existing customer base effectively. This conservative approach meant turning down some potentially lucrative opportunities that would have strained their resources or compromised their standards, but it also meant that they could maintain the level of service and attention to detail that had built their reputation. The decision-making process for these choices involved consulting with me as an advisor and investor rather than simply informing me about decisions that had already been made. The holiday season also provided opportunities to demonstrate the improved family dynamics through our participation in traditional celebrations and gatherings. Thanksgiving dinner that year was held at my house, with Marcus and Vanessa contributing both their culinary expertise and their genuine enthusiasm for maintaining family traditions that honored our shared history and relationship. The Christmas celebration that followed continued this pattern of inclusive planning and mutual consideration of gift exchanges that reflected thoughtful attention to each person's interests and preferences, rather than obligatory gestures or expensive items chosen for their monetary value rather than their personal significance. By the time we reached the anniversary of the financial confrontation that had triggered all of these changes, it was clear that the transformation in our relationships had become permanent rather than temporary. The patterns of communication, respect, and mutual support that we had developed were no longer conscious efforts to repair damage, but natural expressions of healthy family relationships based on genuine appreciation and consideration. The restaurant continued to thrive under this new management approach, building a reputation for consistency, quality, and integrity that attracted loyal customers and positive industry recognition. More importantly, Marcus and Vanessa's success was now built on sustainable practices and honest relationships that could weather challenges and setbacks without threatening the foundation of their business or their family connection. Looking back on the year of transformation that had begun with my disappointing 60th birthday dinner, I felt a deep satisfaction that went beyond the improvements in how I was treated by Marcus and Vanessa. The process of standing up for my own interests and demanding the respect I deserved had taught all of us valuable lessons about the nature of healthy relationships and the importance of mutual consideration and family dynamics. The woman who had been taken for granted despite her crucial contributions to her family's success had demonstrated that love without respect was not sustainable, and that sometimes the most caring thing a person can do is refuse to accept treatment that diminishes their dignity and worth. The devoted mother had learned to be devoted to herself as well as to her son, creating a family dynamic that honored everyone's contributions and recognized everyone's value. The quiet revolution that had begun with financial demands and legal assertions had evolved into a comprehensive transformation of how we understood and practiced family loyalty, business partnership, and personal responsibility. The relationships that emerged from this process were stronger, more honest, and more sustainable than what had existed before, creating a foundation for continued growth and mutual support that would serve all of us well in the years to come. The spring following our family transformation brought unexpected opportunities that tested the strength of our rebuilt relationships in ways none of us had anticipated. A prominent food magazine contacted Sage and Stone about featuring the restaurant in a major article about family-owned businesses that were changing Denver's culinary landscape. The journalist wanted to explore not just the restaurant's success, but the personal stories behind the business and the family dynamics that had contributed to its development. Marcus called me immediately after receiving the interview request, and his approach to the conversation revealed how completely our communication patterns had changed. Instead of simply informing me about the media opportunity and assuming I would be supportive, he asked for my input about how to handle questions about our family's involvement in the restaurant's creation and ongoing success. The fact that he recognized the need to discuss this situation with me before responding to the journalist demonstrated the respect and consideration that had become natural parts of our relationship. He understood that any public discussion of the restaurant's origins would necessarily involve references to my financial investment and ongoing role as an advisor, and he wanted to ensure that I was comfortable with how that story would be told. During our conversation about the media interview, Marcus raised questions that would have been unthinkable during the period when he and Vanessa were taking my contributions for granted. He asked whether I wanted to be included in the interview process, how I preferred to have my role in the restaurant's success described, and what aspects of our family story I felt comfortable sharing with a broader audience. These questions reflected not just politeness or courtesy, but genuine recognition that I had a stake in how our family's story was presented, and that my preferences and comfort level mattered in decisions that would affect our public reputation. The young man who had once seemed embarrassed by his association with my modest catering business was now proud to acknowledge the role my experience and support had played in his success. Vanessa's approach to the media opportunity was equally revealing of how her perspectives had evolved over the past year. Rather than seeing my involvement as something that might diminish the sophistication of their story, she actively encouraged the journalist to explore the multi-generational aspects of our business relationship and the lessons that had been learned through our collaboration. She had come to understand that stories of family support and mentorship were actually more compelling and relatable to audiences than narratives of independent young entrepreneurs who had succeeded entirely through their own effort. The wisdom gained through confronting her own financial problems had taught her to value practical experience and proven guidance over trendy innovation and aggressive risk-taking. The interview process itself became an opportunity for all of us to reflect on how far we had come and to articulate the lessons we had learned through our period of conflict and reconciliation. The journalist was particularly interested in how we had navigated the challenges of mixing family relationships with business partnerships, and how we had resolved conflicts that could have damaged both our personal bonds and our professional collaboration. Marcus spoke thoughtfully about the mistakes he had made in taking my support for granted, and the ways that success had initially led him to overestimate his independence and undervalue the contributions that had made his achievements possible. He described the process of learning to balance his roles as a son, a husband, and a business owner, and how he had developed better skills in maintaining multiple important relationships simultaneously. Vanessa's contribution to the interview was particularly powerful because she spoke honestly about her financial struggles and the ways that confronting those problems had led to broader insights about responsibility and the importance of building success on solid foundations, rather than appealing appearances. Her willingness to discuss her debt problems and financial rehabilitation publicly was both brave and strategic, as it provided concrete examples of how young entrepreneurs could learn from mistakes and build stronger businesses through honest self-assessment and practical guidance from experienced mentors. My own interview segments focused on the lessons I had learned about maintaining dignity and self-respect while supporting family members' dreams, and the importance of setting boundaries that protected important relationships from being damaged by one-sided exploitation. I spoke about the skills required to build sustainable businesses and the value of experience that comes from decades of managing challenges and adapting to changing circumstances. The article that resulted from these interviews exceeded all of our expectations in terms of both the quality of the writing and the positive response it generated from readers. The journalist had crafted a story that celebrated our individual achievements while also exploring the complex dynamics of family relationships and the ways that different generations could support and learn from each other. The publication of the article brought unexpected benefits that extended far beyond the immediate publicity for Sage and Stone. The honest discussion of financial challenges and family conflicts resonated with many readers who were dealing with similar issues in their own lives, and we received numerous messages from people who appreciated the transparency and practical wisdom that had been shared. Several business schools and entrepreneurship programs contacted us about participating in panel discussions and case study presentations about family business dynamics and conflict resolution. These speaking opportunities allowed us to share our experiences with audiences who could benefit from understanding both the pitfalls and the potential solutions for common problems in family business relationships. The attention generated by the article also led to new business opportunities for both Sage and Stone and my catering company. Restaurant industry professionals who had read about our collaboration expressed interest in consulting services that could help them navigate similar family business challenges, and several venues contacted me about providing catering services for events that required the kind of experience and reliability that decades in the food service industry had taught me to deliver. These professional opportunities created new dimensions to our relationships that were based entirely on mutual respect and shared expertise, rather than family obligation or financial dependence. Working together on consulting projects and joint catering services allowed us to appreciate each other's skills and perspectives in contexts that were separate from our personal family dynamics. The summer months brought additional tests of our rebuilt relationships through the planning and execution of a major expansion project for Sage and Stone. Marcus and Vanessa had been approached by a property developer about opening a second location in a new mixed-use development that was being built in one of Denver's rapidly growing suburban areas. The opportunity was attractive because it would allow them to expand their customer base and increase their revenue potential without the risks associated with competing directly with their existing location. However, the project would require significant additional investment, both for build-out costs and for the working capital needed to support operations at two locations simultaneously. The decision-making process for this expansion opportunity demonstrated how completely our business relationship had been transformed over the past year. Instead of presenting the opportunity as something they had already decided to pursue and asking for my financial support after the fact, Marcus and Vanessa involved me in the evaluation process from the beginning. We spent several weeks reviewing the financial projections, visiting the proposed location, and discussing the operational challenges that would be involved in managing two restaurants simultaneously. The conversations were collaborative and thorough, with all of us contributing insights and asking questions that helped clarify the real risks and opportunities associated with the expansion. My decades of experience in scaling service businesses proved valuable in identifying potential problems that Marcus and Vanessa might not have anticipated, while their knowledge of current market trends and customer preferences helped refine the concept and positioning for the new location. The combination of our different perspectives and expertise created a more comprehensive analysis than any of us could have developed independently. The financial analysis revealed that while the expansion opportunity was fundamentally sound, it would require more conservative projections and more careful management than Marcus and Vanessa had initially assumed. The enthusiasm and optimism that had characterized their approach to the original restaurant needed to be balanced with practical caution and realistic planning for the increased complexity of multi-location operation. After thorough analysis and discussion, we decided to move forward with the expansion project, but with modifications that reduced the financial risk and operational complexity compared to the original proposal. The build-out would be phased over a longer timeline. The menu would be simplified to facilitate consistent execution across both locations, and the staffing plan would emphasize experienced managers who could maintain quality standards without constant supervision. My financial contribution to the expansion was structured differently than my original investment in Sage and Stone, with more formal documentation, clearer performance expectations, and regular review processes that protected all of our interests while supporting the growth of the business. The lessons we had learned from our previous conflicts were applied to create a partnership agreement that anticipated potential problems and provided mechanisms for resolving disputes before they could damage our relationship. The autumn months were devoted to the detailed planning and preparation required for the restaurant expansion, and this process provided numerous opportunities to observe and appreciate the growth that Marcus and Vanessa had achieved over the past year. Their approach to hiring, training, vendor relationships, and customer service reflected the maturity and wisdom they had gained through confronting their financial and personal challenges. Vanessa's role in the expansion project was particularly impressive because she applied the lessons learned from her debt rehabilitation to every aspect of the business plan. Her marketing strategies emphasized sustainable growth and customer loyalty rather than aggressive promotion and rapid scaling, and her financial projections were conservative and realistic rather than optimistic and speculative. Marcus's management of the expansion process demonstrated his development as a leader who could balance multiple priorities and maintain high standards while delegating responsibility to trusted team members. The young man who had once been overwhelmed by the complexities of running a single restaurant was now confidently preparing to manage operations across 2 locations, while maintaining the quality and consistency that had built Sage & Stone's reputation. The opening of the second Sage & Stone location in November was a celebration not just of business success, but of the family relationships and collaborative partnerships that had made the expansion possible. The event was planned as a community celebration that honored both our professional achievements and our personal growth over the past 2 years. The guest list for the opening celebration included customers and industry colleagues who had supported the original restaurant, but also family members, friends, and community members who had been part of our journey through conflict and reconciliation. The evening was structured to acknowledge all of the contributions that had made the expansion possible, including my financial investment, Marcus's culinary expertise, and Vanessa's marketing and operational skill. The speeches during the opening celebration focused on themes of collaboration, learning from mistakes, and building sustainable success through honest relationships and mutual respect. Marcus spoke about the importance of maintaining family connections while pursuing professional goals, and Vanessa discussed the lessons she had learned about financial responsibility and the value of experienced guidance. My contribution to the celebration was a reflection on the satisfaction that comes from seeing investments of both money and love produce results that exceed the original expectation. I spoke about the pride I felt in Marcus and Vanessa's achievements, but also about the importance of maintaining relationships that honor everyone's contributions and recognize everyone's work. The success of the second restaurant location validated the conservative approach we had taken to expansion planning and demonstrated the strength of the systems and relationships we had built over the past year. Customer response was immediately positive, operational challenges were managed effectively, and the financial performance met the realistic projections we had developed through careful analysis and plan. More importantly, the expansion process had strengthened rather than strained our family relationships, because it was built on the foundation of trust, communication, and mutual respect that we had established through confronting and resolving our previous conflict. The devoted mother who had once been taken for granted was now a valued partner whose contributions were essential to ongoing success and whose wisdom guided important decisions. As the year concluded, I reflected on the transformation that had begun with my disappointing 60th birthday dinner, and had evolved into comprehensive changes in how our family understood and practiced love, respect, and mutual support. The quiet revolution that had started with financial demands and legal assertions had created lasting improvements in our relationships that would continue to benefit all of us for years to come. The woman who had been marginalized, despite her crucial contributions, had demonstrated that demanding respect was not selfish or destructive, but rather an essential component of healthy relationships that could withstand challenges and support everyone's growth and success. The family that had nearly been fractured by taking each other for granted had been rebuilt on stronger foundations that honored everyone's value and contributions. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.